It's the biggest waves we ever saw in our life. It was crazy.
January 28, 1998. Under blue skies and light winds, some of the biggest waves ever recorded hit the Hawaiian Islands and set the stage for surfing history.
You couldn't have a better day for surfing big waves.
For the few people who make it their destiny to find and ride the biggest waves possible, it was the perfect storm. But authorities would declare it illegal for anyone to enter the waters.
Everyone's going to die that goes out there. It was just completely unsurfable.
Still, some were determined to test the awesome powers of the ocean. It was a day nature, technology, and sport came together, and a few surfers explored the boundaries of their fear and craving for adventure.
The relationship with the ocean is just one that is well balanced in my life. It gives me balance. Without the ocean, I probably won't have balance. The ocean feeds me, consoles me, just relaxing, a place of work, a place of pleasure. You know, it's my life's blood. Our ancestors has taught us to read, you know, the elements, to read the wind, to read the earth, to read the ocean, the waves, the water, the reefs, the fish, the marine life. There's so many different signs that the ocean, the skies, that will communicate to you if you know what you're looking for.
Morning, here's the Oahu surf trend for Saturday, January 24th. The high surf advisory remains in effect for the north and west shores.
Hawaii is normally a place of tranquility, with light trade breezes, blue skies, and clear, warm waters. But a few times each century, the skies, winds, and waters come together and unleash their powers. In January of 1998, the National Weather Service announced that a storm off the coast of Japan was headed directly for Hawaii and would produce some of the largest waves ever recorded. The weather reports indicated that the approaching waves may be big enough to take out roads and destroy homes all along the north shores of the Hawaiian Islands. They had the potential to do the most damage on the north shore of Oahu, which is the most populated and by far the most visited of the islands.
The National Weather Service posts a high surf advisory when the waves are expected to be 10 feet or larger on the North Shore, whereas when they get really big, like 25 feet, we call that condition black. And in that case, the Civil Defense calls the alert, and they actually go out to the North Shore or to the North Shores. They close roads. They have sirens, they alert people, they tell them to get to high ground. They basically save a lot of lives.
Condition black is anything over 25 to 30 feet, up to as high as 35 to 40, and we quickly advise the general public to stay out of the water until those hazardous conditions subside. Our job there is to keep these people as far away from the shoreline as possible during condition black.
Government officials were on alert and ready to evacuate the North Shores. But for some, the impending approach of monster waves was a source of excitement and anticipation. For a small group of surfers, it would be a day of reckoning, a once-in-a-lifetime chance to confront one of nature's most powerful forces.
I came to Hawaii in 1972 to ride the biggest waves I could find. And that goal has never ceased. And this is the only place in the world you can find this big of waves that are this rideable most of the time.
Most surfers pursue the sport for personal reasons, not for competition or public recognition. Surfing is a lifestyle that, for many, forges an intimate relationship with the ocean.
It's sight, it's smell, it's taste, it's hearing, it's touch. The ocean offers you a real complete sensual experience, and I think there's no way to describe what happens and the serenity that you come away with after spending time in the ocean. It doesn't matter if you're surfing or swimming or diving or snorkeling, or the ocean is amazingly gratifying.
The North Shore of Oahu has long been known as the center of the surfing universe.
Nowhere in the world can you find all the conditions that come together that the North Shore present. Here you've got a 7-mile stretch of the most unique breaks in the world. If you're a surfer, this is Mecca and this is where you have to be.
In the wintertime, we're faced with conditions from 2 foot to 25 foot, and it really allows me to expand outside of majority of my comfort zones and work on my surfing in a variety of conditions. So that's why I try to spend as much time here as I can.
I mean, it's like if you wanted to be a mountain climber, you go climb Mount Everest. If you want to be a big wave surfer, you come to Hawaii.
With some of the largest waves ever recorded on their way to Hawaii, big wave surfers were about to face the challenge of their lives. The North Shore of Oahu is home to one of the most famous and photographed surf spots in the world. Much of the history of big wave surfing has taken place right here at Waimea Bay.
Waimea Bay has long since been the legendary spot of big wave riding because it was the last spot you could actually go out when the surf got over like 12, 15 feet.
Waimea Bay is the site of a prestigious big wave riding event called the Eddie Aikau Memorial. This is one of only a few forums where big wave riders actually compete against each other. But this event is more of a brotherhood than a contest, where surfers come together to honor a man who embodied the spirit of the Hawaiian people and had an immense respect for the ocean. Eddie Aikau was a native Hawaiian waterman and lifeguard who lost his life in 1978 trying to save the crew of a traditional Hawaiian sailing canoe. The crew was on a trip from Hawaii to Fiji when strong winds capsized the boat. Eddie volunteered to paddle for help on his surfboard. He was never seen again. Every winter since 1986, there has been a 3-month waiting period to hold the contest. If the approaching waves looked big enough, the spontaneous invitational alarm was sounded. Elite big wave riders from around the world received last-minute notice to get to Hawaii and compete for the grand prize, $50,000 for riding the biggest wave of the day.
The criteria for this was to have solid 20-foot plus surf that would be there all day long, because it takes basically 8 hours to run the tournament.
These conditions are rare, to say the least. Over a 13-year period, from 1986 through 1998, the contest was completed only twice. But a storm in the Pacific was generating waves of such magnitude that when they hit, could result in surf too big to hold the big wave contest. Until recently, surfers had always caught waves by paddling into them. But since bigger waves move at faster speeds, the size of waves they could catch was limited by the speed at which they could paddle.
Waves of that magnitude, there's no way you can actually match the speed paddling. You just fall in the air. You have to match the speed of the swell moving through the ocean, at least for a few seconds, so you can get to your feet and have a clean drop.
Historically, waves over 25 feet high had always been too big and too dangerous to surf. But in the early 1990s, a new form of surfing revolutionized the whole concept of what it means to ride big waves. This new method, called toe-in surfing, allows surfers to ride waves that are simply too big to paddle into.
Toe-in surfing is basically using a personal watercraft, and you water ski behind the personal watercraft until you match the speed of an oncoming wave, and then you begin to surf. But you begin to surf like you've never surfed before, because now you're riding a smaller board, you're going faster, you're covering more distances, doing more turns. It's the best parts of surfing, all compiled into one.
What was once an individual pursuit became a team endeavor. Toe-in surfers rely on each other to access waves, and when things don't go well, to extract each other from dangerous situations. Things changed and developed very quickly in toe-in surfing in its first decade. A new generation of surfers emerged, and they were conquering waves that their predecessors could only dream of. Many surfers say once you're on the wave, surfing is the easy part. It's what happens when a wave overtakes you or wipes you out that can change a perfect surf session into your worst nightmare.
It's the most turbulent, most washing machine effect that you could ever imagine, with intense pressure because you're being forced so deep, so quick.
Total pitch black darkness, you know, your legs is by your ears and you're being twirled around, and just Niagara Falls.
What you got to think of as far as impact is the tons of water that are actually falling. Now every cubic foot of water weighs 64 pounds. So you got thousands of cubic feet, and you're talking tons and tons of water.
The ocean poses a threat and a challenge every day you enter it. It has a lot to do with mental strength and physical awareness. The ability to endure an immense amount of pain and suffering underwater and be good with it and be calm with it.
To achieve this state of calm, surfers prepare and train for wipeouts in many ways. Brian Kialana is a member of the Hawaiian Water Patrol, a group that regularly saves lives in the oceans around Hawaii. His background as a big wave surfer has helped to give him the experience necessary to understand the dangers of the ocean and the ability to help save himself and others. He trains for the wipeouts by swimming deep down to the ocean floor and carrying 80-pound lava rocks.
It increases my strength, it increases my endurance. It makes you a lot more comfortable with your body of attaining, certain levels when you get pushed down into deep depths and being squeezed under, just megatons of energy.
Many people wonder why anyone would subject themselves to such risks.
When I'm on a big wave, I'm living. I'm not just existing. That's the whole part. It just fills you up with that adrenaline, that energy, and when you come in, you just feel like, there's nothing in the world that can bother you after a perfect day of surfing big waves.
People always ask me, say, well, you guys are a bunch of daredevils or risk takers, and I don't look at it that way because I consider ourselves to be more risk technicians because we understand the hazards, dangers, we know what's involved, we know our abilities, we're knowledgeable professionals and educated in the field of what we do.
Here are the 8 p.m. Hawaii buoy reports.
Large surf always pounds the north shores of Hawaii during the winter months, but no one had ever dreamed of surfing waves as big as those said to be on the way to Hawaii on January 28, 1998.
We get very, very intense winter storm systems in the western Pacific that produce unusually large swell. So Hawaii is uniquely positioned to get very large waves. It's the island group that's furthest away from any major landmass on the planet. Essentially, it is the action of the atmosphere wind on the ocean that produces the wave. There are three factors that are important. One is the wind speed, naturally. The stronger the wind, the greater the potential for large waves. The second is the fetch, or the distance over which the wind is blowing, producing the waves. And the third is the duration that the wind is blowing over this area.
Swells are recorded and reported daily by the National Weather Service. Richard Grigg is one of the world's most respected oceanographers and a professor at the University of Hawaii. He is also one of the great surfers of the 20th century. His big wave riding is the stuff of legend.
What determines the shape of the wave is the shape of the bottom. If the bottom is gradual, the wave will come in and spill or crumble off the top. Whereas if the bottom is abrupt, you have a shelf, the wave will come in, hit that shelf, the energy is suddenly and abruptly concentrated upward. It becomes very steep and very unstable all at once, and it throws out in a plunging manner, and you have a top-to-bottom breaking curl. And that, of course, is the ultimate for a surfer, because that's where you want to be, in the curl. As far as monitoring the waves, we have a buoy system in the Hawaiian Islands. In fact, there are 4 buoys, one north of Kauai and then 3 on the southern shores about 200 miles out. These buoys record the motion of the ocean. As the swells go by, they're lifted up and then they fall in between the crests and the troughs. Now that data is radioed and also sent by satellite back to the National Weather Service.
These reports provide general information to the public about daily ocean conditions. They also alert island residents to extreme weather phenomena such as tidal waves and tsunamis. Surfers rely on this data to predict upcoming swells.
It can predict almost to the hour when the swells are going to hit, exactly how big they're going to be, what the winds are going to be, what direction the swell's going to be. And from that you can plan out where you're going to surf, what day you're going to surf, what hour you need to be there almost. It's pretty amazing how much information there is about swells and storms that there is these days, and so accessible.
Buoy 1
winds are not available.
1998 was a year like no other for surf. With El Nino in full swing, the northern hemisphere was brewing up some of the biggest storms of the century. But no one was prepared for the weather data that came in on January 27th. It was so unbelievable that many thought it was a mistake. A massive storm off the coast of Japan generated monster waves that were destined to hit Hawaii the next morning. The storm itself would pass within 1,500 nautical miles of Hawaii. The swells generated would travel across the open oceans until they reached the north shores of the islands, where ultimately they would release their energy. Ironically, the weather forecast was calling for clear skies and light winds.
It was Hawaii's perfect storm. This is known as one of the 2 largest swell events we've ever had in Hawaii. That is, ever meaning the last century, over which records have been kept. We had a storm with winds of 65 knots, blowing for 36 hours over a 1,000-mile fetch, directly at us.
The buoy showed a period of 25 seconds and wave heights over the open ocean of 28 feet. Now, the National Weather Service, through a formula that they've developed with the data, calculated that the waves at the beach would be 44 feet.
Wave heights of 44 feet would produce wave faces in excess of 80 feet, the height of a 10-story building.
I remember my heart pounding. I remember not hearing that kind of report ever. To hear this type of swell coming in, it's kind of like, you know, getting ready for a tidal wave, you know, head to high ground.
The Eddie Aikau Memorial Big Wave Surfing Contest would wait no longer. When the buoy readings for the approaching monster waves came in, organizers decided the contest was on, and the best big wave riders from around the world received word to get to the North Shore. But no one knew what to expect for the next morning.
There was a big question mark in our minds. We didn't know if it was going to be rideable, feasible, or what. We were going to go out and look at it, and if it looked, you know, feasible, we would go.
I don't know that I've ever heard of Waimea being too big, except maybe 1969, and that was supposedly the fluke swell of all time, so I wasn't thinking that this swell was going to be in that range at all.
The Civil Defense administers the strategic plans to respond to natural hazards like tidal waves and tsunamis. In 1969, massive waves of 40 feet or even higher took out beaches, roads, and homes all along the North Shore. There was concern that this storm could produce even bigger waves than in 1969.
I and the entire staff realized that this could be something very hazardous.
Awesome spectacles of nature often transpire unrecorded, but this event would be different. There happened to be a film crew on the North Shore using IMAX cameras to make a movie called Extreme, which featured giant wave surfing.
We came here to wait the winter out, to get the big surf, and hopefully get 5 days of shooting the IMAX film with these guys on the 25-foot plus waves.
The Extreme film crew was already getting what they came for. For 2 months straight, there had been a high surf advisory on the North Shore almost every day. The tow-in surf sessions that usually happen once or twice a month during the winter were happening once or twice a week. Now it looked like they were about to get much more than they had bargained for.
It's 9:30 p.m. on Tuesday night. It's your forecast for a big Wednesday. It'll be the biggest swell we've seen all year. It's going to be an epic day for tow-ins and Waimea Bay.
You don't sleep at all, really. It's like you're lying down with your eyes closed, but you're not really sleeping.
State civil defense crews spent the night and early morning warning motorists of hazardous road conditions as high surf washed onto Kamehameha Highway. No one knew how large the surf was until first light.
The morning of January 28, 1998, brought with it more than anyone expected. Thousands of spectators lined the beaches, roads, and shoreline around Waimea Bay in anticipation of the Eddie Aikau contest. Surfers, tourists, and residents stood in awe.
Waimea is an absolute death cauldron once it goes over 25 feet there. And this was 35 to 40-foot surf. You had all the best big wave riders in the world sitting there going, I don't think so, man. I don't think so. It was crazy.
When a wave stands up all at once and breaks along a long stretch, it is said to have closed out.
Every 3 minutes there was a 35, 40-foot closeout set, and I just looked at it and I just thought, these guys are kidding. How can they even be thinking of holding this thing, you know? Like, everyone's going to die that goes out there. It was just completely unsurfable.
There's so much water pushing into a small bay like that, and even rescue attempts can't help you. So you're taking your life in your own hands.
If someone paddled out at Waimea and make it out, they would be lucky. What would have happened is they would just get knocked in, or knocked under, or knocked out.
Waves are just closing out from side to side, washing up the beach, just taking the whole beach with one wave.
There was a couple of photographers on jet skis sitting in the bay in a zone that's normally completely safe. A wave will never break there, and a huge set came and they only just made it over these waves, like a 40 or 50-foot wave. They almost got completely annihilated. They just saw them jumping over with their skis, and I'm sure it was like the scariest moment of both their lives. Like, we saw that, it was just like, if the jet ski can barely get past these waves, then what hope has a surfer got paddling?
Finally, after 4 hours of staring at waves that were impossible to paddle out to, the contest was called off.
A rarity at Waimea Bay today. Waves too big for the biggest big wave surf contest in the country that has surf's biggest first place payday. Quicksilver Big Wave Invitational almost went down for only the third time in 13 years.
I'm really glad that we're not going to have to risk our lives in saving other people that would be risking their lives out here today. So from the ocean safety standpoint, I'm really glad they canceled today.
The last time the Eddie was run was back in 1990.
But not everyone on the beach was willing to give up the day. A handful of surfers had already hatched their own plan to get out there with their jet skis and access these monster waves.
As I had told a couple of people, I'm outside. I'm out on the outer reefs. You know where to find me.
As soon as the contest was called off, Ken Bradshaw came up to me and said, if you guys really want to capture some history with your IMAX cameras, today's the day.
The film crew mounted a camera in their helicopter, which was ready and waiting nearby. Brian Kialana and the rest of the Hawaiian Water Patrol had been working with the film crew all winter. Now they were faced with the biggest safety challenge of their lives.
Well, our crew and with the Hawaiian Water Patrol headed down to the Haleiwa Harbor, which is where we always put in, the legal place to put in, the safe place to put in. And when we arrived there, the waves were breaking over the breakwall, washing boats up onto the dock, onto the beach.
It's the biggest waves we ever saw in our life.
Well, they started to attempt to put their boats in the water, and the harbor police or harbor patrol comes up and says, hey, you guys can't go in the water today.
So we couldn't access the Haleiwa Harbor. And if we did, we stand a chance of getting ticket or even being arrested.
This was the first time that the Hawaiian Water Patrol had been denied access to the oceans.
I'm not aware of that ever having been done before. We've had to close harbors for tsunamis, but in terms of large surf, that was the first time. And large surf during the winter on Oahu's North Shore is routine, so this was way out of the routine. It was monstrous.
The civil defense had called the condition black alert. No one was allowed in the oceans. If any surfers made it out to the offshore seas and found themselves in situations beyond their control, only the United States Coast Guard would be able to save them. Specially outfitted helicopters patrolled the shoreline, with swimmers on board, ready to be deployed for an emergency rescue mission. But even then, there would be no guarantees.
I don't know that we're ever going to have to pull any of these guys out. We're ready if we need to, but most of them are professional lifeguards or professional watermen or work in some other way around the ocean. They have their own jet skis. They work together as teams. They brief what they do just like we do in the aircraft before they go. Most of them are really good at what they do.
It looked like everyone would have to sit and watch some of the biggest waves ever recorded in the Pacific Ocean to hit the shores of Hawaii. But the Extreme film crew launched their helicopter to take pictures of a rare and beautiful sight, with slim hopes that anyone, might make it out to the one spot that was surfable, an outer reef, half a mile out, in 50-foot deep waters, at a break called Log Cabins.
When it goes over 25 feet, there's no other spot that you can surf. Logs is the only one that'll hold that size.
At Log Cabins, the shelf out there is quite steep, but it's deep. There's a break around 50 feet that drops to 60 feet, about a 10-foot shelf. And that's what actually triggers the wave to break. Now, when it's 25 feet, it's not going to break out there. It's too small. And so it goes right over that shelf, and it goes up a little bit and then doesn't break and comes in. However, when the surf is like 40, 45 feet, it hits that shelf, goes top to bottom and breaks.
When it actually barrels at, with a 60 to 80 foot face, the wave's incredible. It's the most perfect giant wave I could ever imagine, actually.
But just because the waves at Log Cabins were perfect didn't mean anyone was going to get to them. First, they had to get past the treacherous breakwaters and rip currents that were pounding the entire coastline of the North Shore.
It was like the rapids on the biggest river you've ever seen, the whitewater rafters wouldn't even negotiate.
One of the most difficult things about getting out was the size of the rip chops. We were like 8 to 10 feet of just movements of ocean, which was like being in just a washing machine. We were like two little pieces of cork bobbing around on this little boat and just surrounded in ocean.
We're about 60 yards from getting out, and this wave just jacks up. It's the biggest wave I've ever seen in my life. was probably about 50 feet. It was that big and it went all the way down. You couldn't see the end of it. We've gone charging up this wave and we're thinking we're gone. We just hit the lip, flew up into the air and landed on behind it, and there was no wave behind it, and we made it out.
In all, 12 people made it through the treacherous breakwaters to the open ocean that day. What they saw once they got there was beyond comprehension. Mammoth swells as wide as football fields, with tubes big enough to fit a house.
Blue sky, offshore winds, 30 to 40 foot seas, perfectly manicured. They were barreling, they were standing up.
It was absolutely the most amazing sight I've ever seen in surfing. The waves looked as big as like 10-story buildings.
You know, it was just pure glass. And the swells were just coming in so clean. It's the biggest, cleanest swell I've ever seen in my life.
And there, ready and waiting, was the Extreme film crew in their helicopter. Now the only question was, were the waves too big to ride?
The waves looked kind of otherworldly. You couldn't really tell how big they were. And then when people started dropping in, everyone's mouth just dropped. I mean, we were aghast. But to see these tiny figures on these mountains, it never happened before.
It's like 6, 7 stories tall, and you're into it, and you're looking across a block long, and the whole thing's moving at 30 miles an hour, and you've got to get across this. It's so amazing to get a feeling that you get from that.
Pretty much indescribable. Like, I couldn't translate my feeling across with words. It was really incredible. Almost a life-changing experience.
Peter Cole has been living and surfing on the North Shore of Oahu since 1958 and has witnessed much of surfing history.
I was witnessing the most fantastic display of surfing and maneuvering in big waves I've ever seen in my life. And these guys are doing all these turns on these giant waves. You don't even think about big wave riding. It doesn't look dangerous at all. It looked like they were just having fun.
I saw history in the making. The waves were so big and the guys were surfing so amazingly well. We were all just in complete awe of what was going on out there, and we all knew our limitations on that day. We all knew that we didn't have the guts to do what they were doing.
Meanwhile, the helicopter pilot was going right into the action.
This guy was from the Vietnam War. He felt like it was Vietnam in war that day, and he would go down, and a lot of times the surfers were above his helicopter. He was in so tight to that day. At that point, we realized this is history in the making, and here we are with our IMAX cameras capturing it.
After successfully towing into a handful of perfect waves, Ross Clark Jones and Tony Ray found themselves in the worst situation imaginable. They were chased down, running for their lives, from a monster wave that was moving faster than they were.
I towed Ross onto the wave and it looked like we're in the perfect spot, but the wave just kept building and getting bigger, and all of a sudden I realised that the wave was actually sucking me back into it. My equipment wasn't fast enough.
It's a very unpleasant thing being mowed over by, 40 feet of white water. I just remember looking behind me and just seeing this huge wall of white water.
I realised it was going to get me, but I was still trying to get out of the situation. I was like, head down and just go as fast as I can. The biggest danger was the ski hitting me. It's a 500-pound piece of fiberglass and metal. It's going to hit you in the head and could kill you in a second.
I had a few seconds to try and get a full lungful of air. I got that lungful of air and I was still riding in this, just enveloped in this white screen of foam, and I was actually riding for a little while. I had time to release that breath and get another breath. I did it a third time, and then finally eventually smashed me and threw me around like quite violently.
I was hanging onto the ski, the wave blasted me, and I hung on as tight as I could, and it just disappeared. It was like it evaporated from under me. I didn't know where it was, and I was flying through the air for, it seemed like 20 seconds before I landed back in the ocean and got pummeled by the wave.
I was waiting for Tony to pop up, and he hadn't popped up anywhere, which was quite frightening. I was frightened for his life. A few seconds later, he popped out, and he was actually further out than I was. And, yeah, it was an experience.
The worst place to be is at the point where a pitching wave hits the surface of the bottom of the wave. That is the place where the full force of the wave explodes on itself. No one came closer to that place on January 28th than Noah Johnson.
The shape of the wave was really good, really hollow, and it looked like it was going to be exactly what I'd been after, It ended up being so big that my board wasn't making enough headway down and across the wave, and I just was doing everything I could to get my line going where I needed to go, and I just wasn't getting there. When you fall in or around the lip, it can be dangerous. So I turned down the wave, started trying to get away from the lip. I didn't want it to land on me. And I ended up timing it just about as good as I possibly could have, because the thing hit the back of my board and my back foot. It wasn't quite close enough to me that it knocked me down. I ended up being able to ride out the initial explosion. The thing ended up just plowing into me, mowed me off my board, and just sent me spinning. I went on that washing machine cycle. And it was going to be the worst wipeout I'd ever had to deal with. I stopped spinning and tumbling, and the water calmed down, and my partner Aaron was right there. He's right there to pick me up.
North Shore local Aaron Lambert was one of the lucky ones who made it out that day. He was the only one who was actually able to get inside one of these massive barrels and ride out of it. Troy Alotis experienced the worst wipeout of the day.
There was a wave that came in that I was looking for out there. Got towed into the wave, and I was making some S-turns down the face of it, and I was thinking I'm gonna get deep in this barrel. And as I came off the bottom and saw the wave crest and bowl over me, I was standing in this barrel that was so huge and massive. I was shocked. And I thought, I'm gonna just try to pull through this thing and see if I can penetrate through that. You know, hopefully the curtain's not too thick. And when I hit the curtain, it was all over with. My board broke right in half underneath my feet. I ended up in water that was so black I couldn't see which way was up or down. And I knew that there was gonna be a wave behind it sooner or later, and I just started making strokes towards the surface. And when I got to the surface, I was looking at the shoreline of the North Shore, and I saw the mountain range above Pupukea Mountains, and I thought that was the next wave. Turned around and looked, and there was another one coming down on me right then. Luckily, I got a good couple breaths of air, and then I got beat again and got pushed in a little further. Took about 20 more in the head right in a row there. And then Noah J came and got me, and I went back out.
A milestone in the history of surfing was set when Dan Moore towed Ken Bradshaw into the biggest wave of the day, what many say is the biggest wave ever ridden.
Dropping him in and following out on the shoulder, looking back and seeing the wave behind him. He didn't see it. He didn't see what I saw, but it was the biggest. You know, you could have fit 2 houses into this tube.
If it happens to be true, and it seems to be holding true, under scrutiny of all of our peers and my peers, that I have ridden the largest wave ever ridden by a human, that's pretty cool. That's pretty neat.
Miraculously, no one was injured that day. And on shore, there was only minimal damage to property.
Like I'll carry that day with me forever, and every time I think about it, I get a really warm, good feeling, real strong feeling of satisfaction. It almost felt like, it just felt like such a gift being able to see that.
It was like the pinnacle of surfing big waves. It's like, you know, now's the time to go out and look for the biggest wave that you can find, and they found it.
The whole story of January 28th, 1998, from the iCal contest right up through the IMAX filming of the biggest day ever surfed, it's pretty amazing that the day was such a moment in time that was able to be recorded in such a way. It was amazing that not only could we ride the biggest waves ever, they actually were all filmed.
I've been with so much film productions that, you know, they try to plan the best times of the month and they get shut down, you know, lack of surf. To have an IMAX camera right there and capture the most, you know, rarest sight that you could probably see in a century is blessed. I just told all my friends and family, I said, you gotta experience this. This is probably the closest that I can get you to, without risking your life, actually being right there.
You go out there and you come face to face with yourself. You find out who you are, what you can do, what sort of fears can you handle. That's really what the ocean teaches you.
It's funny because you ask yourself, will I see a wave in my lifetime this big again? I can only say I hope so.
Aloha, here's your recorded Oahu forecast, including Honolulu and vicinity. Partly sunny this afternoon, highs 85 to 90. Tonight through Thursday, a few showers at night and during the morning hours.
To learn more about what you've seen on this nature program, visit PBS online at pbs.org or America Online keyword PBS.